bring in the panel. And Marc, we also heard the governor say that questions about blame is, quote, the word choice of losers. What was your reaction to that?
Well, Jake, I think that there's got to be enormous pressure on all the elected officials down there who are trying to protect the constituents and try to find any remaining survivors and care for loved ones who are lost. And so I imagine that temperament's not where it should be at the moment, but I imagine as well that for any official who's receiving those questions, they feel like now's not the time to be asking the blame questions. And that even though it's going to be expected, even though it's to be expected as your role as governor to feel that, it's not when you want to be receiving that question. You want to be focused on the survivors at this moment.
What do you think? What would your advice be to public officials? Because the disaster happened Friday. Today's Tuesday. In a natural news cycle, this is about when these questions start getting asked. Whatever the disaster is, wildfires in California, a school shooting in any city. I mean, people start asking what could have been done to prevent this.
And I think people are allowed to ask those questions. It has to be a both and for elected officials. Your boss is the voters. It's the people who are suffering. It's obviously a tragedy, and that should be the first thing, is making sure that we find any survivors that may still be living and help families mourn and grieve. But when you're an elected official, you have to answer questions. And if something more could have been done, then you need to acknowledge that. And so you can't be defensive. Your elected, your constituents are allowed to ask questions. The media is allowed to ask questions, not just as a gotcha blame game, but floods are always going to happen. And if there's something that another community can learn from questions that you're being asked, that's the responsibility of a public official, I think.
Let's turn to a slightly lighter topic. I want to turn to President Trump's eventful cabinet meeting today. As you know, Trump's former first buddy, Elon Musk, said that he plans to start a third party. Our own Caitlin Collins asked President Trump if he was worried about any impact this third party, should it get off the ground, could have. Here's what he had to say.
I think it'll help us. It'll probably help. Third parties have always been good for me. I don't know about Republicans, but for me.
Is that true?
Well, Donald Trump ran as a third-party candidate in 2000 on the Reform Party.
Oh, that's old school. He didn't really run. He didn't actually pull the trigger.
Right.
Well, there was an announcement. But having said that, look, I don't know how much it helps Republicans. I'm not so sure it's going to get off the ground, Jake. I think there's a lot of challenges to it. There's no doubt that right now, for a lot of Americans, the appeal of a third party is attractive. But once you have actual candidates and not just a no-name party, it becomes different. Even though I question the electoral success of this, I do think that Musk can serve a very valuable role if he actually uses this to focus on $36 trillion in national debt, because neither party has been effective at actually solving that. And if there was a voice out there that even if they're not going to elect candidates, but was focused on that issue, hopefully it would force Republicans and Democrats to begin addressing it.
Look, I think the third party thing is different for presidential elections and midterms, but some would argue that one of the reasons why Donald Trump was successful is because of a third-party candidate named RFK who dropped out of the race, which many thought would be problematic for the Democrats
in 2024.
In 2024, and it ended up being because he could have been a throw-up candidate that if he went on to the Democratic side, you could have got a lot of folks that supported him to support Kamala Harris, but he ended up going for Trump, and a lot of those RFK voters were actually Democratic voters in 2020.
I think it's wishful thinking to think Harris or Biden would have won without RFK.
No, it's not that they would have won, but definitely RFK had a segment of voters that he ended up getting to Donald
Can
Trump.
I talk about this third party for 1 second, and the idea that they're a third party focused on reducing this obscene national debt would be attractive? The way to reduce the national debt is to either cut spending or raise taxes, or both. There's no other magic elixir. And cutting spending, this bill, this big, beautiful bill, cuts spending, and there might be backlash to that because that spending cuts it could hurt people. I mean, we've heard Josh Hawley talk about that. In fact, let me just run a little clip from Senator Josh Hawley, who said he would vote against it, or he seemed to suggest he might vote against it because of the Medicaid cuts, but ended up voting for it. Here he is.
Missouri is actually going to see an increase of $1 billion for rural hospitals from now to the end of the decade. And we will see no benefit cuts whatsoever, again, because of compromise language we were able to win and get put into the bill. So there's a lot of work to do on this. I think it's a mistake to cut Medicaid. I've always said that. I continue to believe it. We have prevented it from happening in Missouri.
Do you think that the Medicaid cuts could end up hurting Republicans in the midterms?
I think that, Jake, when you have one party in power, typically the other party comes back in the midterm cycle. So there'll be a lot of questions of whether or not it was because of the bill. I think the reality is Republicans should be explaining that we're basically just having work requirements, which was a priority of the Clinton administration and the Obama administration.
That's not what Josh Hawley says.
Well, look, I think Josh Hawley is wrong on this, but having said that, you play that clip, which I think is a great clip to show because Democrats are saying how much it's going to hurt the bill. At that very same press conference was Democrat Congressman Cori Bush celebrating the same bill. So for Democrats who say this is going to be critically damaging, Democrats are there with Josh Hawley at the same press conference about it.
I don't think Cori Bush won.
She was.
I don't think she won her election.
Yeah, I don't think she's no longer a member of Congress. But she was.
She was
there.
Interestingly enough, at that event, I don't know what horseshoe theory was going on there.
Yeah. Sometimes you meet on the other side. I think here's the thing: Democrats should talk about what's in this bill. It's not just that they are cuts to Medicaid; it's who is benefiting from this bill, and this is a billionaire's bailout. The tax cuts for the wealthiest of the wealthiest and the middle class and the poorest are not benefiting from this bill, and that is something that could be sold. And this bill is not popular, and it will hurt
working class families had a $2,100 tax increase without passage of this bill.
Yeah, working class families might have $2,100
tax increase.
But
increase
billionaires, when you actually look at the proportion to billionaires and the bailouts that they get, it's not comparable.
All right, Ashley Allison, Marc Short, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.